first thing is to introduce it, and as she says.
You're staying in the room.
And
just make sure nothing goes wrong here.
And I'll just say that this is going to be a story of this man's life. That's all, and his origins and what's happened to him over the last nearly 85 years.
You mentioned earlier, your origins and how that was such a big fascination.
That's the first question that really ought to be. What do I remember, or what do I know about my father, my mother, and born and raised in 2 different countries, and I'll start talking about that.
I think the time is now.
Yeah. I'm ready whenever. I just want to look at it. So we're good.
Well, this is supposed to be the story of where I come from, and where I've been, how I got there, and where the heck I think I'm going. So, questions?
What do you think happened before you came around that led to you being here? Like, what is the story as you've been told that led to you?
Interesting story. My father came from an Armenian community in what was then known as Persia at that time, although it has been historically Iran. And outside of the city of Isfahan, which was the ancient capital of Iran, one of the early Shahs force-marched a whole community of Armenians from Armenia, just immediately north, to come and, since they were educated, to come and build his city, to educate his people, to build his mosque, to build his palace, and but mostly to really educate his people, which he considered ignorant. And the Armenians, who have always had a long history of being relatively highly educated, he coveted that and brought them to Iran. And my father was born just after the turn of the century, about 1903, January 1903. He was born in what was known as New Julfa, the town that had been captured back in the 1600s, was Julfa, Armenia. Mm-hmm. And he said, you're going to name your new community New Julfa. It's outside of my city of Isfahan, and you're going to build my palace, you're going to educate my people, and so forth. And so that's where my father was born. Later in his growing up life, his father, who was a teacher of both the King's English in an English school, both English and music, moved to Tehran, and his education was finished there, and he and his younger brother wanted to emigrate to America with the Golden Streets, and so he arrived here. I don't know. I can't remember the exact year, and I haven't checked it, but it's in about the 1920s. Early 1920s, he arrived in this country, and in New York City. He and my brother spoke perfect English, because my grandfather, who I didn't meet until I was in my 20s, he didn't come to this country until I was in my 20s, but he spoke the King's English, and that's what he taught. And so my father and his brother, who spoke perfect English, my father to his dying day, always very precise, elegant English.
Yeah.
And he came to this country and landed in what was, I think still is known as the Bowery in Manhattan Island in New York City. Mm-hmm. The Bowery has very unique talk. Everybody talks like this, and there's you can hardly understand it, even if you come from this country. You can hardly understand it. Mm-hmm. But they just thought they were in the wrong place. when they came to this country.
Yeah.
And they, like all immigrant people on the streets of New York, they worked hard, worked in a box factory, worked here and there, and got things started, and somehow or other got connected with some sort of a religious organization in Manhattan that was connected to the Christian and Missionary Alliance, which is a missionary-based, missionary-oriented religious organization. It's a denomination, really, very fundamental. And they had a school in Nyack, New York, which is just over the George Washington Bridge from Manhattan. And in fact, there is a cliff called the Nyack Cliffs, I understand, on the Palisades are right near Nyack, New York. Somewhere along the line, my mother, who was born on a farm in Genoa City, Wisconsin, the very southeast corner of Wisconsin, she was the oldest of 5 daughters. And she had somehow or other ended up at the same missionary training institute, as it was called then. And my father and my mother met there. I am the result of their meeting and eventually, of course, getting married. And as they say, the rest is history. But then that's where life began. My early memories were of my father as a teacher. My earliest memory is of being, these tire swings, being in a tire swing on the hillside of Nyack. I don't know how old I was, 2 years old, 3 years old. I don't even remember when our memories start, but that was my first memory.
Who was pushing you on the swing?
I have no idea. I know I wasn't pushing myself, but but that's my earliest memory. I do also remember that I got inside the tire. You know how you can get inside the tire, and then you can roll. And I rolled down a hill, and I remember hitting a pretty hard bump. That's really all I remember of whatever short time that my parents and I were together in New York. Christian Missionary Alliance, which I don't know about it now, but it was for many, many, many years, decades. It was the world's largest missionary organization, and which relates later on in my life to another connection that's very, very interesting. But the Christian Missionary Alliance had a church in New York City, in Manhattan, in the lower mid-50s, 40s, I can't remember the exact location. And their headquarters was in New York City, in Manhattan. And my father somehow or other ended up being a musician and teaching music. He ended up directing the choir. And those were in the early days of radio, and I remember that they took the choir and they broadcast on the radio in New York City in the very early 30s, middle 30s. So that's some of my early memories of their origins. My mother, being a farm girl, maintained connections with the farm throughout the rest of her life. And all of my boyhood summers, my brother and I, we would go up to Wisconsin with my mother, and we would spend the summers on the farm. And that's of course a long story and a wonderful one, and many, many, many happy memories there. But my father started teaching, directing choirs, teaching voice at that time. In the early 30s, and also started to go to Columbia University, and ended up pursuing both an undergraduate and a master's degree in music. And that's what was the foundation of his education and some of my musical heritage. That gets us started.
Yeah. What's your earliest memory of your father?
Rolling me down the hill in that tire.
Yeah. So he was one doing the pushing.
And my mother laughing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. That's my earliest memory. I must have been about 3. I don't know exactly how. 2, 3, something like that.
Yeah. Wow. And so growing up in New York, that was during the Great Depression, wasn't it?
I was born in March 1929. The Depression officially began in, what was it, September, 1929. And every once in a while, my father and my uncle, his brother, would say that they blamed the whole thing on me being around. And I was, of course, great cause of a depression of one sort or another.
What else about growing up in New York? Was there any other great memories or significant ones?
Yeah, they're all significant because those are the years that I was in New York City. The actual city, or in Queens, until the late summer of 1941, which is when World War II started. And so, yes, I was in New York City all of that time. We lived in various places in New York City. We lived first, that I remember, in New York City, on 121st Street, an apartment house, 4 stories, maybe 5, a walk-up.
Okay.
And it's still there, or it was at least in the 90s when I was in New York City for a meeting. The building was still there, still prospering as an apartment building. We had an apartment on the top floor, no refrigerator per se, except an ice box that used to buy ice cubes or ice blocks, put it in there and you put it out in the window. And that's the way we kept food. We didn't have a refrigerator at that time. Poor, yes, very poor. My father did not make a lot of money. My mother had no money. And so, yes, Amsterdam Avenue and 121st Street was at the bottom of a hill that if you look straight west, up the top of the next hill about 2 blocks away, was Riverside Church, which was very famous as being one of the private enterprises of the Rockefellers. They built that church as sort of their church on the upper west side of Manhattan Island. I remember how poor we were. I remember one day my father thought that we had struck great fortune. Amsterdam Avenue started going down a hill at that particular point. And those are the days of truck farms. And a truck loaded, open box truck, steak truck, loaded with sweet potatoes, was coming down Amsterdam Avenue, and some of the potatoes bounced off onto the street. My father thought, gold. We had enough food from those potatoes to eat for 2 or 3 days, whatever it was. I remember that so vividly. I remember that my brother and I used to, as boys, we used to play on the roof of the apartment building. And my parents never knew this, but kids do crazy things and you wonder how you live. One of the things I remember doing, there was a ledge on the edge of the roof. I remember walking on that ledge once, 4 or 5 stories straight down. Perfectly content walking. I remember doing that. How you survive, who knows?
Who knows?
Kind of miraculous.
Yeah.
I remember also my brother and I, when we were really quite young and stupid, we thought it would be awfully much fun to take all these clothes in a clothes basket and open the window and just watch them go down. So we threw a whole basket. I don't know whether it was already laundered clothes or yet waiting to be laundered. I have no idea. But clothes that were in this basket. I remember we got roundly spanked for this, that we tossed all these clothes one at a time, watching them all drift down the street. Crazy things you do.
Yeah, exactly.
You remember how old you were?
It must have been 4, 5 in that period. 6 possibly. I don't think so. We were there probably until I was about 6, I think, 5 or 6. I remember that I started school, kindergarten, in a private church school, a St. Agnes church, which was 2 or 3 blocks away, 3 or 4 blocks away, and they had a school, and that was my first school. And I remember went to kindergarten, and I guess I was pretty precocious because I already knew how to read. And I would read to the kids in a little circle in our kindergarten class. And so that's even early on in life, I was a good reader and having good fun. Learning.
Mm-hmm.